Hello friends, I made this for almost a year ago. I made a video about Scorpio and the death card. Today I'm not going to dive into all the same themes, just a few of them, and make it really quick because not only are we in Scorpio season, we're in Scorpio Mercury retrograde, Mercury Scorpio retrograde, whatever you want to say it. Obviously we're in retrograde because listen to the words coming out of my mouth. So what about it, right? So last year I went through this card and two other cards to kind of unpack the medicine that is the death card as it relates to Scorpio. Now I'm going to be picking 3 different cards, but it's still big themes, big lessons, right? Because of the 2020 election, because of the other astrological things that are happening, you are probably feeling insane, just like me. But that's fine because we're going through a collective transmutation, right? Well, the great thing about Scorpio is it's all about that transmutation. So let's dive into the cards, right? Today I have the Morgan Greer, the Fountain Tarot, and the Apparition Spirit Speak Tarot to kind of take us through in this quickie deep dive around this card and some of what it relates to Scorpio. But more importantly, I'm trying to unpack this card so that it's not so spooky. We tend to look at a lot of cards, and by we I mean the human race, tend to look at a lot of cards as either positive or negative. But of course, we know that this is not true. No card is positive, no card is negative. Cards don't happen to you, but we experience things, right? We might decide something felt negative or positive for us, but in the reality of the world, these things are not evil or good. These are not ideas that the tarot really abides by if you read like I do, which if you don't, just leave. This isn't for you. But if you're one of those people who's a holistic reader or you're just getting into cards and you want to understand death a little bit more, ow, I pulled my own earring, you will want to stick around and find the fuck out. So what we're talking about today is death, and I want to start with the Morgan Greer. So a few things to be aware of with this card, right? We see this card with a beautiful white rose. This actually reminds us of the rose that's found in the same deck with the Fool, the first card in the majors, right? Or some like to say the first before the rest, or the one before it all. Whatever the fuck you want to say is fine with me. But the point is, this theme of the rose is there again. And we almost see that the figure of death is coming to take said rose. There is this river behind them, which you could say is the river Styx. But what I like about this the most is the idea of the death, rebirth cycle, right? In one of my last videos, I talked about expansion and contraction, right? These might seem like good or bad things, but expansion can be painful, and contraction can be healing, and it can be soothing. So it's kind of hard to say that this is good or bad still, right? Right? So let's talk about why this is contraction and why it's actually a really good thing. So when we think about Scorpio season, we're in this part of the season where we're transitioning. We're seeing a lot of things die off, right? Or we're starting to see that happen more and more. We start to see the leaves fall. We start to see certain transitions in the air, maybe more flowing. At this point in Philadelphia, where I'm at, the transition is not as heavy as it might be up north, and it might not be as subtle as it is down south. But you will start to notice the transition happening now, which comes really close to this relationship with the life rebirth cycle. So what we can see here is there's actually a really big amount of hope in this remembrance of the Fool card, right? So that's one lesson with it. Another thing about death that can be important to unpack is that this death is not the end. That's really important. Let's look at death in the Fountain Tarot, shall we? In this version of the tarot, we see a horse with gleaming eyes between 2 trees. There's a dark sky and a light ground. And this connection to death reminds us that it is a transitionary period, right? We see the horse in between two trees, almost moving through its space, but still in between. Death is a transitionary phase, right? It's not actually the end. It's just another state in our state of being. But as human beings, we are very geared towards seeing death and loss as being a bad thing. So what we see is there's a lot of loss going on in this time of the year. If you were to pull this card, this would be a very ominous presence. But truly one of the magic things we can pull from this particular card of death is that there's this connection to the in-between. So as we come closer and closer to the spooky season, that is Samhain or Halloween, this is where we get to the in-between time, right? We can connect with this shadowy realm of what we know and what we don't and kind of explore it. So an invitation here is to have this remembrance, right? There's also this invitation to be soft. And what do I mean by that? So the interesting thing when we were looking at this card is this remembrance of the rose that's in the Fool card, right? So this actually gives us a really positive little bit of information where there's hope, there's life, there's still growth to be had, even if something is coming to its closure, or this rose might even be about to get cut the fuck down. It's still not totally as dark as we want it to be. And what death asks us to do in the tarot is to actually change our relationship with the idea of death. Instead of seeing it as the ominous factor, which it definitely can be and looks like in this picture, remind us that it is the inevitable. Change is inevitable. As we reevaluate our connection to death, we reevaluate our connection to things that are outside of our control. They're inevitable. We can see that there's an invitation to soften. We can be the rose. We have the thorns to protect us, but there's nothing to say that the inevitable death will not come. And we can't stop it once it does. Change is coming. Death is coming. Taxes are coming. So with that said, let's look at the last card, the most modern card, but also the strangest card because it's my super strange deck that I love. Death in the Spirit Speak, Apparition Spirit Speak Tarot is really crazy, right? This version of death really embodies this idea of the rebirth process. Sometimes you gotta die in a painful way, but it doesn't mean you're not gonna come back. And this card really leans into this idea that we can release through this experience. If we try to stop the inevitable, we're going to get dragged, right? So this idea with this card and what's really special, something big we can take away, is that there is release, there is hope, and there is rebirth. We can almost see this person is sick, they're dying, they're in sludge, they're in a dark space. But through their heart in this transformational time that is death, they are rebirthed in a most beautiful way. So, as we are all going through a fucking ego death right now, thanks to Donald motherfucking Trump and this goddamn election, remember that even though there is pain, even though there is suffering, there is transformation through the action. There is more to come on the other side. So, it's not that you should just give up and say, I guess the resistance is over, right? No, it's a softening. It's a releasing of knowing what we can and can't control and where we can be rebirthed. So as we're going through this election, as we're going through the fact that Mercury's in retrograde during an election, that's really going to have a lot of our ballots in over through the mail. Remember, our connection to death is never not there. This card is a welcome reminder that we can soften into the release, that we can allow ourselves to be in the in-between space. We can allow ourselves to travel into the depths of darkness and be reborn. So this card is not a negative, but in fact a huge positive thing. So keep that in mind as we're moving through the rest, oh, itchy armpit, as we're moving through the rest of this death season, Scorpio season, getting through Scorpio retrograde. Remember one thing in particular. The release is coming and the release is good. Remember the Scorpio medicine, especially when it starts to get the most uncomfortable, because let's face it, I'm going to be buying a bottle of wine on November 3rd, and I hope you have one too. Bye, friends.